What is going on, everybody? And welcome to the CTW show. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo. Alongside of me tonight, Nick Franco and Griffin Aldrich. And unfortunately, we come to the Celtics fan base and the rest of the NBA community with yet another somber live stream, another somber recording, because today we're going to be talking about the recent news of Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, it came out after the Celtics were eliminated in Game 6 of the 2025 Eastern Conference semifinals against the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden after the Celtics were mollywopped by 38 points in Game 6. It came out via Ramona Shelburne. Celtics forward Jaylen Brown wasn't just playing through pain during the playoffs. He finished the season with a partial meniscus tear, sources told ESPN. He'll be reevaluated this week to determine whether surgery is necessary or not. And here's another screenshot from the story Ramona Shelburne released on ESPN. This is via ESPN.com. And just a little minute here to read this. Boston Celtics star Jaylen Brown finished the season with a partially torn right meniscus, sources told ESPN. Brown had been playing in pain during the last month of the regular season and the playoffs, which concluded with Friday's Game 6 loss to the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Forgive me, folks. I'm reading off a really tiny screen right now. He will be reevaluated this week to determine if surgery is needed, sources said. ESPN previously reported that Brown had received pain injections in his knee. Those injections began in March, sources said. So Jaylen Brown, this story coming out after the Celtics were eliminated in Game 6, of Jaylen Brown playing through a meniscus tear. And meniscus tears, as Celtics fans know, we're pretty familiar with meniscus tears because in the past, Robert Williams, an important Celtic, an important center, an important backline defender for the Celtics back in 2022, he came up with a meniscus tear in March of that season, needed surgery on his meniscus, and then afterwards missed a month, came back in the playoffs, and was limping all around. So now we get this news of Jaylen Brown after the horrible news of Jason Tatum and his Achilles, the news of Kristaps Porzingis and his illness, Hauser with his ankle, and then Jrue Holiday with his hamstring. Just a plethora of injured Celtics out there on the roster. But Griffin, starting with you, what were your initial thoughts hearing this news about Jaylen Brown's torn meniscus?
Well, if it wasn't for starting off the show so hyped, I know I had the hat and everything like you, Seamus. I was over here rocking it.
I'm sorry. It's because you chose the rock music to start off with.
I know you got.
Yeah, we went through it for everybody watching right now. We went through it. We were literally. We just tapped until it was like, oh, nope. It was like, show me the dress. It was like, nope, send her back.
But it's like you can't, with how devastating this offseason has already been and is gonna be with like losses from the team, you gotta have some hyped rock music in there, you know? But my initial thought, Seamus, is it's like another one. Like, come on. Like, but you know, you look at Jaylen Brown. Now, I want to pull up this by Zack. Can we get that up there? Jaylen Brown fought through it like a warrior. I mean, he said it right there, and it's so true because you look at this season with Jaylen Brown, and you see he was battling through some injuries, and you saw, you know, that last series kind of heading into. And we've talked about this over on Celtics Nation Rise, and we've talked about here on Celtics Talk Weekly about him, like, is he, you know, pushing through it and being selfish to kind of get in those awards? And we saw by the end of the season, he was in visible pain and literally didn't play those games to get those extra bonuses and awards and stuff like that. And so it shows you how much pain he was truly in. And it was that initial bone bruise. Now it's a meniscus tear. And you look at that and you see the unfortunate news with Jason Tatum and how terrible that was. And then you look, you're like, all right, well, we're kind of getting a preview in Game 5 of what it's going to look like next year with Jaylen Brown leading the ship. Now you look and you're like, if he needs surgery, he could be out with Tatum just as well as long. It could be both of them. And we could easily go from it being the Jaylen Brown show and talking about like, all right, well, what are we going to do with Tatum to sync back in with Jaylen Brown after being the primary scorer, to easily being like, wow, our two guys that we traded Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett for, and the main two rookies, like our core for the Boston Celtics, could easily not even be playing next season. And that's like, all right, you go from Tatum, your superstar player, and you lose him, devastating. I think I maybe was even close to shedding some tears. My eyes were watery the whole time. But then, seeing your Jaylen Brown, who looked like he was playing phenomenal, and then right after the series, it's like, all right, well, we're taking Jaylen Brown from you too, because he might be down next season. But it's devastating and it hurts. It hurts as a Celtics fan, and it sucks. It really sucks. That's my initial thoughts, though. What about you, Franco?
Whoever prayed on the Celtics' downfall, their prayers were answered. We're looking at this push that Jaylen Brown was able to give us during this playoff run. It was a real, almost the story of what was going on with the Celtics. They were completely battered by the time they got to the New York Knicks, and the New York Knicks were able to take full advantage of that throughout the series. Obviously, getting pain injections and getting things taken care of to keep on pushing through the season is a testament to the commitments that Jaylen Brown has and the die for the city mentality he brings to this team, and why he is viewed as one of the core leaders. And that's really why I was hoping that he could come into next season fully healthy. Obviously, we're waiting on the diagnosis. I was just scrolling through Dr. Franco on Google search on partially torn meniscus, and I'm seeing things that say when it's partially torn, it could take 3 to 6 weeks to repair. And then on the more major side of things, if you're looking at a complete recovery from surgery, it may take up to a year to get up to that, especially if you're playing at high impact level as an athlete. So this could be just as major of an injury to Jaylen Brown as it was to Jason Tatum, and also it might have a long-term effect on him. Obviously, it could. We don't want to see him lose any of the one of the best attributes to his game, which is his athleticism and his ability to cut to the rim and be a stout defender who can defend anyone on the court, and also bring an athletic advantage to the Celtics, especially on transition. But I just looking forward to next season. There was, if the Celtics were eliminated by the New York Knicks and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were still healthy, I don't think that you're looking at this team and saying that you're looking at such a rebuild that you're looking at as you go forward into the season. If you're going to be going into opening night and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are off the court, how can you rely on players like Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday to be available and shoulder the weight when Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have been there to do that since they've been acquired by this team and have been key pieces in why the team was able to win a championship in last year and were able to get to the point they did this season. But now it's the next man up mentality, and durability and depth is going to be the name of the game for the Celtics this offseason. And availability is going to be the best ability, especially when you're looking at these guys. The best player on the court for the Boston Celtics very well could be Derek White on opening night, which is a scary reality to look at as a Celtics fan. But if the right moves are made, and knowing Brad Stevens, he's probably got a couple moves in his pocket. We'll obviously share our thoughts as we go closer to the offseason and free agency beginning, trades happening around the league in the NBA draft, to give our thoughts throughout that. But until then, we'll be just focused on this injury and just the guts it took for him to continue to push through this New York series. And it's a shame that it ended to none. But if this ended up being a longer, if they somehow were able to win game 6, even though it was the complete opposite of that, and they were playing in a game 7, it would be only get worse, and the Indiana series would almost, you'd be looking at this team almost down to the bare bones of a lot of players off the court, because I think this team really just waved the white flag as this season ended, as symbolic as that was.
But can
Yeah.
I say
Go ahead,
something?
Griffin. Go ahead.
And we're all about conspiracies here. I think so. Would you say so? Let's see.
Oh,
No,
so
not
here's
all.
the thing. Look, I was thinking about this the other night. I'm like, I think I'm actually really conspiratorial, except I'm not really willing to go out and say it's fact, but I'll say, hey, this is a perspective that's given, and I'll mention it. I'll mention it, but I won't say it's fact. That's what
All
I'll
right.
say about conspiracy theories and being conspiratorial.
Do you guys want to hear a lingering thought I have? I think it was you, Franco, that you were agreeing with me about the Porzingis thing. Remember when we were like, "Oh, this illness could be just for rest and stuff." Was it you? I don't remember. But I think this. I don't think this, but it's just a lingering thought for you guys. Do you think potentially this could be like, say he doesn't get the surgery and they just have that out there? Do you think this could just be like kind of a excuse maybe, because you saw he had that bone bruise? I don't think they would lie about this, and I know that's probably a dumb thought to even surface, but what do you guys think? Do you guys think this could kind of be like, because with Porzingis, and we've been talking about this, him still battling with that, do you think that's kind of to save his reputation, like you've been saying, Seamus, and his
Well,
value? Could this potentially be the same with Jaylen Brown?
well, to me, Porzingis, there's nothing like he's sitting at the media pressers at his locker room with microphones in his face, with phones in his face, and he doesn't sound sick. He doesn't appear sick. That's where I look at Porzingis's ailment, right? His injury. And I go, okay, well, is there some reputation saving here, some general fatigue because he's not in shape, but it's being called an illness, and maybe he did have an illness a long time ago, but it's not necessarily around, and that's still being made an excuse. But Jaylen Brown, I don't think it's an excuse, because we've seen Jaylen Brown deal with this for the past 2 months, literally 2 months. The
Yeah, and
first
bone bruise
inclination,
isn't
the
like that.
first the first inclination we saw of Jaylen Brown dealing with a knee issue was after the March 12th game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was the last time Jaylen Brown played over 30 minutes in the regular season. And think, the regular season ended a month later on April 13th. So Jaylen Brown, in the last 16 games of the regular season, played 8 games. All 8 games, Jaylen Brown played under 30 minutes in, and that was after playing in the previous 8 games over 30 minutes. So Jaylen Brown, he played 8 of the previous 10 games before the last 16 games of the season. And in those 8 games, he played over 30 minutes in. And at that point in time, that's when we started to raise questions about Jaylen Brown's ability and availability come playoff time. And we talked about it a lot at the end of the season. That was a huge conversation, and that was one of our main talking points the last week of the season. It was, what's going on with Jaylen Brown? What's going on? It felt like every single game we had a clip about Jaylen Brown's knee injury. And that's where I do look at this and go, this I don't think it's a save your reputation type of thing. I don't think it's an excuse, because he was dealing with this before the playoff run. Whereas Porzingis, he dealt with it in March, didn't deal with it in April, and then dealt with it randomly again in May, and then didn't visually appear anything more than tired, fatigued, and just playing terribly. And I guess we can say yes that's exactly what happened in Porzingis, but was it an illness or was it just Porzingis not being in shape and playing terribly? I'm not really certain. As for Jaylen Brown, I think there's a legitimate excuse for his knee injury here when it comes to how he played the back half of the season, and particularly the end of the season, mentioning the 8 of the last 16 games missed and played, if you want to break it down like that, but all of those games under 30 minutes. But I just believe Jaylen was clearly void of his burst, his explosion, his athleticism, his lift, his verticality near the end of the season. I mean, think about what Jaylen Brown looked like in the 2024 NBA Finals. Think about some of the highlights that came out of that series from Jaylen Brown and why he won NBA Finals MVP in 2024. Jaylen Brown was one of the more athletic players in the entire series, one of the more active players in the series, one of the more physical players in the series. The dunk I remember, or the highlight I should say I remember from that series, is Jaylen Brown taking the ball aggressively to the paint and dunking all over the Dallas Mavericks. And I believe that was game 1 of the NBA Finals last year. That same lift, that same verticality, that same athleticism, that same physicality from Jaylen Brown was not there during this playoff run. And we saw it play out
No.
multiple times, whether it was on the fast break, whether it was him going to the rim, just in the half court. Jaylen Brown, it just wasn't, the burst wasn't there. When the finishing ability and power wasn't there from Jaylen Brown. And we even saw him during this playoff run. He didn't shoot particularly well for most of the playoff run, and he struggled in a lot of these games. And it was very clear that Jaylen Brown was playing at a percentage lower than 100%. Jaylen Brown, I will say, despite the injury of his torn meniscus plaguing his playoff run, still a mightily impressive feat for Jaylen Brown to play. Let's see, we played 11 playoff games, right? Yeah, 11 playoff games. And Jaylen Brown in those 11 playoff games played 36.6 minutes per game for a total of 403 minutes over the course of 11 games in the NBA playoffs. And you see some of these games mightily impressive from Jaylen Brown. Most notably, game 2 against the Orlando Magic in the first round. Jaylen Brown shot 12 of 19 from the floor, 5 of 7 from 3, had himself a 10 rebound night, 5 assists on the night as well for Jaylen Brown, and had one of his better career games and scored 36 points as well that night in game 2 against the Orlando Magic. The other most notable, the other more notable, I should say, performance from Jaylen Brown in the playoffs that makes you go, wow, this was actually an impressive run for Jaylen Brown despite some of his struggles. Just the fact after the run, he was playing on a torn meniscus. Game 5, just a couple of days ago against the New York Knicks, comes out, 12 assists, turns the ball over only twice. Only twice. That was something we were raving about after that game. Only 2 turnovers from Jaylen Brown in that contest against the New York Knicks. And he passes to 12 assists. And then looking on the scoring end, 26 points that night, and he shoots efficiently from the floor. He shoots 9 of 17 from the floor, 3 of 5 from 3, 6 of 12 from 2. Those are the 2 games I look at. Game 5 against the Knicks and game 2 against the Magic and go, wow, Jaylen Brown was playing on a torn meniscus? That's insane. That's absolutely insane. But I'll say this too. We saw throughout the playoff run, the meniscus clearly plagued Jaylen's ability to be Jaylen Brown consistently. Yes, he put up those big performances with Jason Tatum out of the lineup 2 different times, but all of these other performances, I mean, there are some rough shooting nights for Jaylen Brown in the NBA playoffs. And you see, he shot 1 of 10 from 3 in game 1 against the New York Knicks. In game 2 against the New York Knicks, he was 8 of 23. In game 1, he was 7 of 20 from the floor, shot 6 of 16 against the Orlando Magic. And I believe that was, I want to say game 4, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, game 4. And then just wasn't quite, I mean, the only game of the playoffs in which Jaylen Brown made over 10 field goals was one game, and that was game 2 against the Orlando Magic. All these other games, Jaylen Brown, single-digit field goals made, and just the percentages, he finished off the playoff run 44.1% from the floor. And then if you look at his true shooting, I believe Jaylen Brown, his playoff run, let me get this number real quick. True shooting in the playoffs, 54.2%. So that's below league average. League average is around 57%. Jaylen Brown, 54.2% true shooting in the playoffs. And you could see it clearly affected his ability to play the game in which we know Jaylen Brown knows how to play. And so for me, I think the physical evidence is there on court to say, okay, Jaylen Brown, this injury affected him during that run. And I don't think it's some kind of facade. I don't think it's some kind of excuse for Jaylen Brown at the end of the season. And just some more information on Jaylen Brown's injury here. So it's being termed as a partial tear. It's being termed as a partial tear from Ramona Shelburne. So it's not a full tear. And the partial tear can be managed by injections, in which we saw from Jaylen Brown, and we saw come out that was the news in which came out from Jaylen Brown, or I should say about Jaylen Brown near the end of the season. He was getting injections into his knee to manage that knee. And we did see that at the end of the season. That is a sign, a potential sign of a partially torn meniscus, is when a player does forego those, or I should say they go ahead and have those kind of procedures and injections. Not saying every time it's going to be a torn meniscus, but certainly if you see a player, if they're getting injections, that can be a sign of something going on with their knee, as we saw from Jaylen Brown at the end of the season. And he comes out with a partial tear. And typically, so I wrote this down on the injury report. Jaylen Brown's knee injury kept coming up as a posterior impingement. Okay, so a posterior ligament impingement, or just an impingement on the injury report for his knee. Apparently, in the case of a posterior tear, or a tear closer to the back of the knee, right? Surgery is more common for a partial tear that's located in the back of the knee, or a posterior tear. So he had a posterior impingement on the injury report. If that's what he was dealing with for the end of the season, it's possible Jaylen Brown does have surgery on this thing. But I'll say this, Franco, you mentioned the differing timetables for Jaylen Brown's surgery and recovery, and some of this stuff it's kind of struggle talking about because we're not doctors here, we're
Right.
not medical professionals, but it's I don't know how long this is going to take, because we've seen different meniscus injuries over time take different amounts of time. I mean, we saw Robert Williams. He had meniscus surgery in 2022. He came back in a month and then clearly wasn't himself. And if it was the regular season or any time of the year, any other time of the year than the playoffs, any other time of the year, he probably wouldn't have been in the lineup when he was. So I just wonder, is this going to be a 3-month thing? If it's a 3-month thing, he's likely ready for opening night. If it's a 6-month thing, he's probably ready by Christmas. And you never know. It could be something where I'll ask this question later. I'm going to save this question for later, but it could be something where he's out for a prolonged period of time, way longer than we actually think. And I just don't know I don't know what to expect out of this Jaylen Brown injury and the recovery time moving forward. But Griffin, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of add on to like my initial take too about that conspiracy thing. I don't think it definitely wasn't, because you look back at that Magic series too. I don't know if you guys noticed it, and I think I may have mentioned it on a post-game show, but there was a limp to Jaylen Brown, and you saw that his knee was clearly bugging him. And you saw in that game that he was in pain, that first Magic game. And then I feel like after his pain injections were kind of like settled in, he kind of like, all right, it didn't hurt as bad. But if you go back and watch game one, you will clearly see that Jaylen Brown had a little like limp to him, and you saw there was visible pain. And I like what you said. His explosiveness wasn't there, and it wasn't the Jaylen Brown that we're all used to. Obviously, there's that Superman picture of him diving for the ball, but like that's the most Superman Jaylen Brown you got. You didn't get any flashy dunks and stuff like that because he was in visible pain.
100%. And I'll say this too: is I wonder, should Jaylen Brown have played through this injury? because Griffin, you talked about the visual side of this injury was very apparent on court because you mentioned the Jaylen Brown limp. He did not play in 8 of the final 16 games of the regular season and played under 30 minutes in all of those games. And I remember game 79 against the New York Knicks. Unfortunately, that was a great night for Celtics Nation until the playoffs rolled around against the New York Knicks. But hey, we'll take the wins where we can get them. But game 79 against the New York Knicks, I remember coming on here with Rob and I was raising alarm bells. I'm going, look, this Jaylen Brown injury is not good. It is not good because this man, what the data he's putting up right now, that is not a recipe for success or a recipe for health come playoff time when it comes to Jaylen Brown. And I look at it and go, okay, he knew. And I don't want to say this. I don't want to speculate and say I don't want to say for a fact that the Celtics knew about this injury, but I'm a little skeptical of whether or not they may have known earlier in time because if he's dealing with a knee injury in March, why wouldn't they run more tests in March to figure out what it was so that they could properly manage it in the playoffs? Because if he's continuously having pain, what if it's an actually serious issue to the point where he becomes more injured later on down the line and the Celtics just, they throw up their hands and go, oh, well, we didn't know he had a partially torn ACL and now it's completely ripped in half and blah, which technically, I guess, we're not medical professionals, but apparently a fully torn ACL is actually better than a partially torn. I don't know where I heard that, but regardless, something like that where you're thinking, okay, maybe it's not serious, but then he puts more pressure on it, plays on it more, and then it becomes more serious. That's why I say, why wouldn't they test for this back in March? It makes me think, yes, the Celtics knew about this injury back in March. The public wasn't told about it. Clearly, they were managing it with injections, and that's, again, one of the notes here is a partially torn meniscus, that's what it's being diagnosed right now, by Jaylen Brown's injury. It can be managed by injections, and that's exactly what we saw at the end of the season. And they termed it a bone bruise. Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, Griffin, that's true. That's
No, wait. I was gonna wait.
Here,
right,
I got here.
No,
here.
Send it to me.
Here, it's a little. Here we go.
No, send it
It's
to
a little
me.
dirty.
Send it
Got
to me.
some
Send
plaster
it.
and some glitter on it
No,
right
listen. This is the thing. So
There you go.
I was thinking about it, and trust me, it's been in my thoughts. So listen. Send it. Either send it to me, or this is what's gonna happen. So Quincy, he lost his bet too. So I was thinking about this. What we can do.
Yeah, what was that? Game 4 he lost it? Hey, valiant effort. Made it through a couple games.
So I was thinking about this. So Quincy can we'll go to the beach and the water's warming up. So we'll grab some ice. We'll grab some ice. So we'll grab some ice. Like we'll do an ice bucket challenge. And then like during the video, I'll have on the Yankees hat and we'll make it like a clip and stuff. Because he said he has Yankees hats. If not, then I'll look either for a cheap Yankees hat or someone sending it to me. Like you could send me a Yankees hat. Seamus can send me a Yankees hat. But listen, I will honor the bet. It's just the fact
Yankees hats. They're all cheap.
I don't. Yeah, but if I buy a Yankees hat, that's just like. Sorry, I couldn't talk for a second. That's just like a Yankees. I don't know. I'm gonna wear the hat. But it's just a matter of when I could get my hands on one. So it's happening. I promise. It was a shake. We shaked on it, and we also did the fist bump. So it's happening. It's just a matter of when I can get the hat.
And backstory for everybody, that was from the Knicks Celtics playoff preview. We had T from Born for Sports come on here, as well as Jorge. But I believe that bet was with T, right? Right, Griffin?
Yes, it was.
So a bet between T and Griffin. Griffin bet, what was it? Celtics in 4, or else he wears a Yankees hat. And then obviously, I mean, Celtics in 4, that was a pipe dream. I mean, that was I don't know. Anybody can calculate the odds on that one. I don't know if Griffin had I don't know if he had positive return of investment on that one. I don't know if he had EV. But
listen. I'm gonna say this. The cockiness in me started at the beginning of the season. I got humbled when we went into that slump, but then I was like, all right, this is where I'm backing myself up. I was right against the Magic. I was like Celtics in 5. I was right on there. And I'm like, well, you know what? Knicks fans want to be cocky. I'll be cocky too. But we don't talk about that. I was well humbled. All right. I will say that. I was very depressed, and I still am. But I got to breathe. I got to breathe. We all got to let breathe.
Well, bringing us back on the point of Jaylen Brown, real quick. Jaylen Brown, at the end of the season, the whole point here was Jaylen Brown. We knew about this injury. I think the Celtics knew about this injury. Jaylen Brown knew about this injury. Even the public,
Yeah.
we didn't know it was a torn meniscus, but we knew something was going on with Jaylen Brown's knee. We had public conversations about Jaylen Brown potentially going through the entire 2025 playoff run at 75%. I mean, that was the conversation. It was Jaylen Brown is probably going through this playoff run around 75% or worse. He's not going to be around 100%. That was very visually evident on court. But looking at all the data from both the game logs and then the on court with Jaylen Brown, looking at all the data that's available surrounding Jaylen Brown and this torn meniscus now, as we came to find out, should Jaylen Brown have been playing through that knee injury come playoff time? And did the Celtics, did they push him a little bit too far in games 5 and 6, knowing, all right, Jason Tatum's out, our season is likely over? The series wasn't over, but the season was just, it was going down the drain quickly. Did
Well,
Jaylen Brown and the Celtics push this a little bit too
I-
hard? It's obviously, in hindsight, when you go out in the second round, you go, oh, he shouldn't have played up. But the Celtics were
I-
going for a
right.
championship. They were going for a title. But should Jaylen Brown have played through this
Uh,
regardless?
I'm going to give credit to the Celtics training staff because we've sent in, they have done remarkable work throughout the season, and they did a great job of maintaining this team all the way to the point of where they did. There was probably a lot of times that these players should have not been on the court, like Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday, and that's just not the mentality of this team, is to take those extra rest days and uh, settle down. And I don't think the Celtics training staff would also put such a star player of Jaylen Brown's caliber in a position where they could be risking his long-term health and his potentially his career with a lingering injury like a meniscus tear. So I think they knew that this was something that could be worked on during the off season and repaired during the off season. So I think that's where the injections came in as a substitute for recovery, rest and recovery. And honestly, I don't know if the Celtics would have even been able to make this push without Jaylen Brown, because imagine this injury happens to Jason Tatum without Jaylen Brown on the court. We're looking at game 5 and game 6, or even earlier on in that series. Well, we're looking at this team already in a bad position against the New York Knicks team, who stacked up extremely well against them throughout the series. But you're gonna be looking at the rest of this offseason as a day by day process for this team. And going forward, it's just a matter of what's gonna happen when Jaylen Brown comes back. I have a feeling, obviously, I'm not a medical expert. We'll continue to add that disclaimer to the show that none of us even have a doctorate, so we're not going to try to go down that route. But I have a feeling that he is going to be ready for the beginning of the season. It's just a matter of, will he ever be able to get to that level of athleticism that we've known from him in the past, when he won Eastern Conference Finals MVP and NBA Finals MVP for this team the year prior. And will he be able to do that with such a short recovery time? And will this team try to have him ready by week 1 or day 1, or will they take their time and be more conservative? Because now you have to think about the fact that now they're potentially there's not really much room for both of your stars to be on the bench and inactive for a stretch of the season. So they might try to rush back one of these injuries just due to that fact, which is scary to think about. And we've seen that have a negative effect on multiple players' careers here and also in past history.
Yeah, the Celtics unfortunately have a pretty up and down history when it comes to dealing with injuries and managing injuries. And I think obviously not every team is going to be the Los Angeles Clippers, but when that report came out and that court case came out between the former Clippers trainer and the former trainer of Kawhi Leonard, or one of the trainers of Kawhi Leonard, one of his medical doctors, trainers, one of those guys for Kawhi Leonard. When the story came out and the court case came out between one of Kawhi's guys slash the Clippers guys versus the Los Angeles Clippers, the actual team, that kind of gave us, I believe, insight, the NBA community as a whole. It gave us some insight around what teams are actually thinking in these situations. And I think it can be easily assumed sometimes, but this court case that came out between the Clippers and one of Kawhi's trainers, it basically outlined the Clippers forcing Kawhi to play through knee injuries in which would have jeopardized his health later on down the line. And we can see from the bottom line of every organization, it's about selling tickets, it's about selling merchandise, it's about the TV ratings, right? And from that standpoint, star players being out on the floor is mightily important, especially at this time of year when you're playing a national TV game, a nationally televised game, pretty well every other night in the NBA playoffs. Teams want their star players to play and will ultimately do anything to put their star players out on the floor. And yes, there have been moments where it's obvious teams will not want to jeopardize the health of their star players for the future. We saw one like that this season. Victor Wembanyama, blood clots. Damian Lillard went out with blood clots in what, March, and came back in May. That seemed very hazardous when it happened, but Victor Wembanyama, he goes out in February. He just misses the rest of the season. The Spurs in his second year are not taking a chance on Victor Wembanyama, and they're going to be in the category of doing what's best for Wemby's health. But then when you get to competitive teams who are right on the cusp of a title, right on the cusp of making it to, say, the conference finals, like the Celtics just were, there is sometimes extra incentive for that organization to push the star player over the edge and maybe, just maybe, alleviate themselves from being concerned with that star player's health. And as unfortunate as that sounds, that's the reality that some of these organizations live in because it's a bottom line business. The NBA, for as fun as it can be, it's a bottom line business that's all about the ability for each and every organization in the NBA. It's about their ability to make dollars, money, cash, moolah. And Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, they are those guys for the Celtics. And one of these conversations we're actually going to have within this live stream is going to kind of contradict that point just a little bit for myself here, but just kind of shows the different perspectives. But ultimately, the Celtics, they've done a great deal of not necessarily wiping injuries under the rug in the past, but the Celtics have been known to maybe rush players back, let players play through injuries, not necessarily manage the injury all that well. We've seen it in the past with Isaiah Thomas. Maybe you could say Kyrie Irving, Kimball Walker. Those are less egregious examples of that. And then Robert Williams in 2022 clearly was not healthy playing after a torn meniscus in the NBA playoffs. And whether that was Robert Williams' decision or not, the Celtics have this track record of allowing players to play through injuries and seemingly not being as concerned about their long term health as they are about the particular moment and that player playing in that moment. And this could have been an example of that. Jaylen Brown, I think they knew about the torn meniscus. I'm not
Definitely.
reporting it as fact. Not reporting it as fact, but I'm speculating heavily. Heavily
1,000.
speculating. Heavily speculating. This is about as far you can go, as far as you can go without saying it's a fact. I'm heavily speculating they knew what this injury was. It makes no sense why they wouldn't do tests back in March. And we all know the media. It's a coordinating game nowadays. I believe ESPN, Ramona Shelburne, they probably knew about this a while ago, and there was an agreement between the organization, maybe the Players Association or the NBA and ESPN of we're not going to release this information until the season is over. And I think that there's reasons as to why that could be. Obviously, just promoting to fans that players are actually healthy, not putting a player necessarily in danger. I'm not saying other teams will target that injury, but if it's out there that players are playing through injuries, there's going to be a lot more pressure on themselves just from an opponent's standpoint and just publicly as well. And should Jaylen have played through this injury? Just answering this question myself here, it's hard to say because I get the competitive spirit. I really do. I mean, you're going for a title. You're going for something this year if you're the Celtics. They were going for something a Celtics team had not achieved since 1969, 68, 69. Back to back Celtics titles. The last time it happened was when Bill Russell was the head coach back in 1968 and 1969. That is the last time the Celtics won back to back titles. And the Celtics had a chance to do that in 24-25 this season. And so I can understand the competitive spirit from Jaylen Brown and the Celtics organization as well to want to go and grab back-to-back titles and want to compete for those back-to-back titles. I do understand that. I do understand that. But at the same time, I look at this and go, ugh, what does this say about the future of the Boston Celtics? What does this actually say? Because just first looking on the horizon, is Jaylen Brown going to be ready for opening night? Is he going to be available to make an impact on next season? Because I think there's multiple routes the Celtics could go this way, could go right now with this injury and with just the general situation of the Celtics right now, of what the roster could look like after some transactions are made this summer. Obviously, no Tatum next year. And then Brown, the status of him, it's going to be interesting to see what direction the Celtics actually go in, depending on whether or not Jaylen Brown is available to start next season. And I think that will ultimately answer the question of whether or not Jaylen Brown should have played. Because I do look at some future items with Jaylen Brown and think, okay, Jaylen Brown, he's a little older than Jason Tatum. He's 28 going on 29, and he's still in his prime, still in the meat of his prime. And meniscus injuries, they're not necessarily career ending, but they can affect
They'll be around.
somebody's mobility. They can affect somebody's durability within just how many games they play in an NBA season, how many minutes they can play in the NBA playoffs, and just the longevity of players' careers. We've seen meniscus injuries definitely shorten players' careers and lead to other injuries in which players faced in the past. And so I look at this now and go, should Jaylen have played? I'm not going to say he should have or should not have because I can see the competitive side of Jaylen Brown come out wanting to grab back-to-back titles and wanting to exhaust his tank for such a crucial moment because who knows, this could be the last time the Celtics contend. It's not guaranteed the Celtics just contend with Brown and Tatum again. I mean, this was their window. This is their window, and it felt like it slammed shut in that second round against the Knicks. But this was their window, and I don't blame Jaylen Brown for playing. But you do have to factor in the future outlook of Jaylen Brown and what this could potentially do to his career later on down the line. And just looking at it from a short-term perspective, I'm looking at it long-term, just how he's going to be in 2, 3, even 4 years from now, and how that could impact his, say, mid-30s, late 30s. But just in the short term, I wonder, is Jaylen Brown going to be available for opening night? Do you believe he's going to be available for opening night, Franco? Do you believe he's going to be ready for next season?
I ideally, when I'm looking at forward to next season, I want to say that Jaylen Brown is going to be ready for night one, but is that going to be the Jaylen Brown that we're accustomed to? Is that going to be the Jaylen Brown that we've seen lead this team and leave it all on the court like he did in Game 5 and when this team has their back against the wall, are they going to be able to fight through that? And are they also going to just be able to tread water? Because now you got to look at the Jason Tatum injury and be, let's say he's coming back around. Hopefully, we don't know what the timeline with that is. So it's hard to really give these live reactions as the reports of when the timetables haven't even been set yet, because we don't know what we're looking at. We might be seeing Jaylen Brown out for week or night one and on opening night, but hopefully he's at full effect and they have a good roster built around him, and they also acquire enough depth that even if Jaylen Brown is out for that game, that you have the pieces in place to put out enough of a roster to compete and win a few games. I don't know if that entails the Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis being on this roster, because these injuries also affect these guys and their contracts. Because if Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were fully healthy, I would feel confident saying that this team could potentially go back for another season with not the same crew in particular, but they could go back with the same starting lineup and have another chance at winning. But with these injuries, that is completely wiped off the table for next season. So that almost guarantees that you're going to see the Celtics moving on from Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis and potentially a couple of other role players, Luke Cornett and Al Horford. They're up; their contracts are up at the end of the season, so you might see them go for cheaper guys that are more available, can play longer minutes, can create a bulk of the production on a team's offense for the first few games of the season. And hope, ideally, in a perfect world, you're going into playoffs after this team is able to hold water and is able to win a good percentage of the game. They're floating around the 4 or 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, and you have Jason Tatum back, and this team gets a resurgence around All-Star break and is heading into playoffs with confidence, and it is able to get that momentum with both their star players returning. But like we've said multiple times on this live broadcast, we just don't know what the outcome with these injuries are. So it's hard to say what is going to happen. We can say what we'd like to see, but it really comes down to preparing for the worst and hoping for the best when it comes to the offseason. I know we're going to be hearing from Brad Stevens tomorrow around 2:30 p.m. and he's going to be doing his first conversation with the media since being eliminated from the playoffs. So a lot of these tough questions are probably going to get answered. We're probably going to find out a little bit more information on both of these injuries, where this team stands moving forward, alongside what their plan is. He's going to probably give a hint at what his intention is this season. Obviously, remaining competitive and remaining as one of the top competitors in the Eastern Conference, and to be in the conversation for NBA championship is always in the cards for the Boston Celtics, because the expectation is set to no other. But you might hear that they're going to be looking for options, and they'll definitely bring up the finances and be like, hey, this second apron has been kind of the death of us. And especially if we have the two guys who are eating up a majority of this team's contract. I believe it's over 50% of the luxury tax is eaten up by Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum's contract, if not more. You are really looking at the supporting cast and hoping that they can piece it together. So expect this team to put together a new supporting cast that is a little bit more productive and a little bit more reliant and more independent, and like we've said, we're gonna dive into what we think are candidates. We're gonna dive through any of the trade possibilities, any of the free agents, any way we can bring back, who we're gonna bring back. But as this injury lies for now, it could, looking at this long term, the how the Celtics manage this is imperative of what this team looks like in 5 to 10 years from now. If you are able to maintain Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum and not see them see a, a steep in there, go on the negative side in production at this point of their career, you may be able to maintain this duo for the rest of their career and have a chance of competing in the years of 2030 and beyond. However, if they are starting to see flaws in their game, starting to miss games, start to become inconsistent, start to get that injury bug like we've seen happen to players once they start to reach this time, like James Harden, Russell Westbrook, it's something that we've just seen around the NBA. So hopefully the Celtics can manage this, but this it's a, like we've said, it's a business, and having these guys on the floor is imperative. So it's hard to keep the balance, but when it comes down to the beginning of the season, I'm fine with them taking their time and making sure this is handled properly, which I'm sure this off season they're going to be doing anything to make the right steps to him being available for opening night. But I just want to make sure that they are really just catering to whatever needs are happening, and also have players in place to alleviate some of the stresses off the two players when they come back, because you can't expect them both to return to 100% after both grueling injuries and long recoveries. So even if they're back before playoffs, what are they going to look like?
Do you believe it's more or less likely that Jaylen Brown plays on opening night? Do you
Yeah,
see Jaylen Brown playing on opening night, or do you see him sitting out?
from a partially torn meniscus and from my Google searches, I think that we are going to see Jaylen Brown on opening night. At least that's the goal. I'm sure he's going to be dead set on that throughout this off season and training and going forward. But if he isn't available, it's no reason to rush him back. But other than that, I think seeing Jaylen return before opening night, I'm sure he'll be in the building for training and preseason and the training camps during the summer. But yeah, I'm confident that they'll have him ready, but it's just a matter of if he's going to be adapting his game, playing a less aggressive game, relying a little bit more on his shot and his IQ to and being a playmaker rather than being the athletic scorer and slasher we've seen in years prior.
And welcome back to the program, Griffin, by the
Thank you.
way. Got some technical issues on Griffin's end. But from your perspective, Griffin, we're just here talking about whether or not Jaylen Brown is going to be ready to go on opening night. But uh, when you're away here, we were talking about whether or not Jaylen Brown should have actually played on the injury. And obviously, we don't have a timetable for Jaylen Brown's return right now. And it's very hard to say what the long term implications could be for Jaylen Brown with this injury. But from your perspective, Griffin, should Jaylen Brown have played on this injury? And just looking at the short term future with Jaylen Brown, do you believe Jaylen Brown will play on opening night in 2025?
I'm gonna say this. I feel like short-term injury, yes, he does play in 2025 if we look at like no surgery, but we
Opening
also
night, opening night.
opening night. I'm gonna go yes. I'm gonna say yes. We obviously see with the Time Lord how long he was out. So it's difficult, but I'm gonna go and say yes. I'm gonna be confident, and I'm gonna say yes. No surgery, 100% he's back. Should he have
This is hard. I
All right.
know.
Yeah, it really is. So I think this. I feel like should have he played on that torn meniscus. I mean, he's like kind of like a Jason Tatum too. I feel like it's hard to get him off the floor, and that kind of was like a Kevin McHale type situation. Again, watch Celtic City and see that. But it kind of is the same situation. But I believe this. I believe that Jaylen Brown, I do think he will be back opening night. I think Celtics fans need to be prepared for that. And I think they're confident that that will happen. And I think if Jaylen Brown were to play in the playoffs, I think he is looking to kind of come back opening night. I do believe that is the case.
What's funny is I have this written down as a question, but it's kind of just a general point that I may just have for the panel here. Will the Celtics tank and use Jaylen Brown's knee injury as an excuse to sit out both Brown and Tatum for the entirety of the 2025-26 season? Because look, and I'll say this right off the bat. Tanking is not guaranteed, folks. And tanking, it can be for different purposes. Some teams tank to get the number one overall pick. Other teams tank, like the Philadelphia 76ers, to, well, get the pick they actually got, which was a top 3 overall pick. I'm sure the Sixers, they loved the fact that they had their hand in on the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. However, the Sixers, they're just happy to have their pick at number 3 right now and not have their pick converted over to and conveyed over to the Oklahoma City Thunder if it were to fall 7 or beyond. So some teams tank with the purpose of simply attaining a high pick, not even the number 1 pick. But even under those circumstances, tanking is not guaranteed. I mean, ask teams what 4 through 8, 4 through 9 this year. I mean, I think the NBA, if you want to get conspiratorial, Griffin, as we were talking about earlier, I have a conspiracy theory that the NBA, now, I'm not going to say they rigged the lottery, but I think they punished the tanking teams within the lottery. If you look at the lottery standings, what is Franco doing right now?
I'm not entertaining this.
Oh, okay. You know what? I'll just carry on. But if you look at the lottery standings this year, if you look at the lottery standings, I kind of believe that the NBA punished the tanking teams. The Charlotte Hornets, they're 19-63. 4th overall pick, 17-65, Utah Jazz. One of the worst records in Utah Jazz history, if not the worst. 20.7 win percentage. 5th overall pick. The Washington Wizards, 18-64. We know how bad they were this season. Saw them a couple times. 6th overall pick. New Orleans, terrible. 21 wins. 7th overall pick. Brooklyn sold away their entire team to tank. 8th overall pick. Toronto openly tanked and was talking about it on media day at the beginning of the season last year. 30 wins on the season, 9th overall pick. So I think tanking teams actually, they might get punished by the NBA. I'm not sure. It's a theory. It's just a theory out there. I'm saying tanking, not always guaranteed, but the Celtics, from their perspective, I'm not saying they go ahead and tank, but they've played a lot of playoff games with Brown and Tatum. I mean, Brown, and there goes Griffin once again, unfortunately.
I would do that. I would do the same about this conversation.
But here's what I'm saying. Here's what I'm saying,
sick.
Franco. The Celtics have been through quite a few playoff runs with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. Jaylen Brown even said the other day, he said when the Celtics were eliminated in Game 6 against the Knicks, he said it feels weird being out in May. It feels weird finishing in May. Which for Jaylen Brown, if you look at his entire Celtics career, the earliest he's ever finished was, I believe, May 8th, 2019 against the Bucks. And then this would come in second, which not by round, just by date. Because 2021, hey, the Celtics went out in the first round, but it was later in May. It was the end of May. It was early June because of those playoffs. They were pushed back because of the COVID season that started on Christmas after the 2019-20 COVID bubble season. So just in terms of the May, June dates, Brown and Tatum, their standard is playing into May, playing into even June, as we saw in 2022 and 2024, even 2021 as well. I believe we saw them play into June that year too, even though, again, it was the first round. But We've seen them play into the playoffs every single year, deep into the playoffs. Is it possible the Celtics look at next year as a punt year just for the team in general? They go, this is becoming a disaster. We have to sell off all these pieces. Brown's not healthy this offseason. Tatum is not going to be healthy all of next season. Do we just sit these guys out, give them a year's worth of rest, and then attack it once again, attack the title and the chase for the title once again once Brown and Tatum comes back, both of them come back into the lineup in 26, 27. I think that's kind of dangerous because Tatum, he's going to need to be out for a year with that Achilles tear. That's the unfortunate part about Tatum. But then Brown, if you're just letting him linger and be out for the entire year while he's healthy, that could, I mean, sitting out and not playing basketball for an entire year, that could obviously play as a negative to somebody's game, and especially somebody who's in the meat of their prime. And this would be a season next year where you'd be wasting a prime year of Jaylen Brown if you were to sit him out all of next year. That's why I think this is definitely. I'm. Don't get me wrong, Franco. I'm definitely in your camp of maybe this is a rambunctious question and an idea, but I'm not saying
Blasphemy.
it's not. It's not necessarily out of the realm of possibilities because I could see the Celtics looking at Brown and Tatum and going, okay, next season is a sunk cost. It's a lost season. We played into the playoffs for the last half decade plus with Brown and Tatum. Ever since 2017-18, that was the first season they were together. And then Brown, I mean, he played in this 2017 playoff run, even with the Isaiah Thomas Celtics. But I could maybe see a world where the Celtics go, let's just let's just keep these guys' minutes down this season. Let's just keep them out of the lineup. Obviously, Tatum's going to miss the whole year, but how much of the year does Jaylen Brown miss? That's where I have a question. Usually, I would say with this meniscus tear, and say we were competitive next year, the Celtics were going to be competitive. I would say this meniscus tear, I wouldn't worry about it being a problem for opening night. But now, especially it coming in May right now and coming right after the season, uh, opposed to say right after the season in June or even July. That's a month or 2 more months down the line. This is coming in May now. Jaylen Brown gets a whole month more to rest, and we saw with Robert Williams. I mean, he was out in June and then later than that. But I wonder if Jaylen Brown, if this was a competitive situation, I think he comes back opening night, no problem. But since it's not going to be a rather competitive situation for the Celtics next year, I wonder if Jaylen Brown and the Celtics, and more so the Celtics side of things, I wonder if the Celtics sit him out for, say, the first 20 games of the season, first 25 games, sit him out till Christmas, sit him out not even till Christmas. Maybe they keep him out until November 25th. It felt like when Kristaps came back, yeah, sure, he missed the first 17 games of the season, but there was a lot of season. We forget how long the NBA season is. There was a lot of season left for Kristaps to ramp back up. And it could be a thing where Jaylen Brown, they treat him kind of like, I don't want to say they treat him like Al Horford, Drew Holiday, and Kristaps Porzingis next year, but maybe they sit him out. They don't play him back to backs. They sit him out on occasions in which they know they can win. Maybe they do some of that. Maybe they do hold him out for the start of the season. But as I mentioned earlier, this is where I'm contradicting the point I made earlier. Earlier, I was saying teams want their star players to play because of their bottom line. They want to sell tickets. They want to sell merchandise. They want to sell a story to their fan base and to ultimately the customers buying their product. So, in the Celtics' best interest, it's better for the Celtics to have Jaylen Brown out on the floor on opening night. But there is another view to be looked at, and there's another view to be considered that maybe the Celtics look at Jaylen Brown and this injury and they make it an excuse next season to sit Jaylen Brown out more than they
I
would during a competitive season. I think
I
you could get on board with that,
I
but
don't
maybe
think
not the whole
it's
season. The whole season is ridiculous. I would
well.
say part of the season is a possibility.
Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't say it's not. I think the word excuse is the wrong word there. I think that it's a more they just need to have the pieces there. They should be going into this offseason with the pure thought that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are not going to be healthy. Doesn't matter if or when they're coming back, they're not going to be healthy. So you need to have assets in place that you could put out there on opening night and feel confident that they can win that game. That it depends on who they end up trading for, or if they end up trading for someone. I don't know if this team feels confident with Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis being the ones to shoulder that weight. So that's why I continue to bring up that those pieces will most likely be moved on from and brought to bring in more players with depth and durability that can contribute and also hold down the fort. Well, Jaylen Brown, if he were to do those 20 games off, like you said, but if he does come back and they wait until he rests and he's at full strength, likewise with Tatum, they are going to they're going to want to be in a good position when those guys come back. You don't want to have Jaylen Brown walking into a shit show of a season like the 76ers were having at the beginning of this year when they, what was it, 0-7? What was their streak that they started off the season as with losses? Wasn't it like 2-17 to start the season or something like that? But
Wait, I'm confused. How did this person in the comment section know we were? No, how did they know we were rooting for the Pacers? I mean, I did have Pacers gear out the other night, and we did just film a CNR recap with a bunch of Pacers gear in the background. But I mean, that could be it. That could be it. But did we mention it here on this broadcast? I mean, this is what I'm saying. I'm like, how did this person? How did they know? How did they know? How did they know? How did they know we were going for the Pacers this series? Just a good guess. Just a good guess. Sorry to interrupt your point. I just saw that comment. I was going, well, here's the comment I'm talking about, everybody. Just to inform you. It was just on screen, but
I don't know what. Yeah, I agree with the comment, but back to the point, I just think that they aren't going to allow this team to fall into a hole and have these guys come back to a bad situation, like a bad start, like with the 76ers or some odd team. But I think you're going to see these guys make additions that can also, when Tatum and Brown are inserted back into the roster, can play alongside them and give them a good chance of winning in the championship. Until we get timetables, I'm still banking on the Celtics having Brown and Tatum for the playoff stretch for next season. That's what I'm thinking is going to happen, unless we start to hear otherwise. We start to hear other things about this recovery, but the timing of both these injuries is terribly unlucky. How close it is to the end of the season. If this happened earlier on in the year, I would feel more confident with these guys coming back. Right now, I think that there is still a chance that you can get these guys back, and you just need to have the pieces around there to hold water, because it, like we've seen in the playoffs before, it doesn't matter where the Celtics are. It just matters if they make it. If they go into the playoffs next year as the 7 or 8 seed, I still think if Tatum and Brown are back in the lineup, they still have a good chance of winning. Either or, Brown or Tatum are back in the lineup, I should say.
Yeah, and I think Brown will definitely be back in the lineup come playoff time next year. It's just Tatum, I would not bank on Tatum. I think that is such a dangerous injury to play around with. I see Tatum sitting out an entire season next year, especially with how late in the season his Achilles tear occurred this year in May, obviously in the semifinals just a week ago from this point. But Griffin, obviously, welcome back.
Can I mention something too?
Yeah, go ahead.
It just sucks because we've seen minor injuries with the Jays, like, both even at the same time. I went to a game against the Trailblazers a couple of years ago, and they collided into each other and got injured. And then Taco Fall played.
Oh, you were at that game? That was See, this is like the second iteration of that, but way worse.
Oh
Way
yeah.
worse.
So
Because remember when both there was that famous picture and it was Brad Stevens who was standing there, and then Brown and Tatum are both lying on the ground, injured. It was like, wow, this is symbolic of this entire 2021 season.
yeah,
Everything is going wrong. And then at the end, Brown and Tatum are just sitting there on the floor injured, and Brad Stevens is just like he's in disbelief. He's just sitting there with his hands like what like both of my stars are injured on the floor in front of me right now.
yeah,
And literally in front of him. I mean, you
yeah.
know about it, Griffin. You were there.
I was at that game. So it's unfortunate that that happened. And like, and we've seen plenty of times in their careers where they've both been down at the same time with injuries, but it's nothing like this, especially with the severity. Sorry, that was not, I don't even think that was a word. The severity. I can't even
No, you
Severity.
said it
No,
right the first
severity.
time.
You were
Severity,
right.
yeah,
Severity. Come on,
severity.
man.
All right, I did get it right. Severity of the injuries, Tatum especially, but even with Brown, if he needs surgery, both players needing surgery, this could be catastrophic, especially for next season. But I'm gonna mention a take that I already said too, how the Boston Celtics are kind of gonna have to do something the Red Sox have been familiar with and have a bridge season, and I hate to say that word coming out of my mouth with the mention of the Boston Celtics sucks. It hurts. It sucks. But it
It's
makes you think.
necessary though. It's
It is.
necessary
It
sometimes.
is.
It is.
But it makes you think if Tatum never went down, could have the Celtics, even had the same look at the team next year? Or maybe shake it up a little bit. It definitely is a talk for sure. It definitely is a talk. But Seamus, go ahead. You have more questions.
Well, not well, of course I have more questions, but I also want to say this. Franco, you mentioned how there was no timetable for a return, and we mentioned it several times here. But that makes me think too. It adds to the point of the Celtics controlling their own destiny when it comes to these injuries. Now, I think Tatum, from my perspective, I think Tatum's going to miss the entirety of next year. I already mentioned that. But as for Brown, there being no timetable for Jaylen Brown, let me start on Tatum real quick. Tatum, the reason though there's no timetable right now is they probably don't want to say he's completely out for the season because they don't know that yet. But they also don't want to just say, "Oh, he's out for the season," and then say there is a chance later on down the line, say in March, April, May. They're leaving it open for Tatum, but I think they're also leaving it open for Jaylen Brown specifically for opening night. I think, obviously, I mean, this week we're going to find out what more is going to come out of this Jaylen Brown injury news because in the report by Ramona Shelburne, she mentioned Jaylen Brown is going to be evaluated this week for whether or not he will have surgery, and seeing if Jaylen Brown has that surgery or not will determine what his timetable actually is for the future. So I think that's going to be the obvious point early on within this injury timeline for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. That's going to be the first data point that we kind of start figuring out what the game plan is going to be, specifically with Jaylen Brown at the beginning of next season. If he has surgery or if he doesn't have surgery, I think after that determination is made is when we'll actually get a timetable for return. And it could be, oh, he's expected to return by opening night. He might miss the first couple weeks of the season. We'll start hearing about that once he's evaluated this week and they determine whether or not he'll have surgery on that torn meniscus. But just speaking on Brown and Tatum in general, both of their injuries, we see Tatum go down with an Achilles tear. Brown, he goes down with a meniscus tear. And it feels like I mean, we talked about rock bottom with the Celtics. This feels pretty close to it right now. It could get way worse. I'll say this, it could get way worse. But seeing the two Celtics superstars, both with just terrible injuries. The Achilles is the worst injury in all of sports. I mean, unless you're talking about death or losing a limb or something like that. Outside of something extremely serious like that, the Achilles is one of the more serious injuries in sports, just from a performance perspective. That's going to be a concern for Tatum moving forward. But then Brown, he's had knee injuries in the past. He's had ligament and he's had ligament muscle injuries in the past surrounding his knee. And now here's another data point of Jaylen Brown. He's going to be missing part of this summer. I mean, that's we've heard that with Kristaps Porzingis last year. Kristaps Porzingis was saying, I didn't really get my normal off season in. I came back into the season, maybe not my full self because over the offseason I was rehabbing an injury rather than trying to add to my game. That's what Kristaps Porzingis was saying once he came back into the lineup this season. As for Jaylen Brown, that's going to be part of the same story. This offseason, instead of adding to his game this offseason and getting better, he's going to be rehabbing an injury. And that is certainly something that could hold him back from number one getting better as a basketball player, but just in general being the player in which we know he can be into the future. And that kind of brings me to these questions right here. They kind of all go in with each other. Is are the Jays breaking down right now? Are the Jays breaking down in the midst of their prime? Will the Celtics actually be able to return to contention? I know your answer on this, Franco. That's a yes. And I think all of us probably believe in that happening. But does Brown and Tatum, do they lose an athletic advantage over their opponents now that they're dealing with injuries that could seemingly affect them later on down the line? I mean, Jaylen Brown, he's dealing with a knee injury. That knee injuries have destroyed players' careers. The Achilles, we know how dangerous that injury is. Are the Jays breaking down? Have they lost a competitive athletic advantage against younger teams? We saw the Celtics play against the Oklahoma City Thunder this year. The Celtics looked like the slower team. They looked like the team who couldn't catch up with the Thunder up and down the floor. And to me, I go, well, damn, that was this season with the Oklahoma City Thunder, which congratulations to them on winning that game 7 against Denver today by a wide margin. But the Thunder, if they made the Celtics look slow and rickety in the 24-25 season, what are the Celtics going to look like with Brown and Tatum in 26-27 when Tatum is coming off an Achilles injury and Brown, he's now dealing with this meniscus injury and who knows what other injuries he could be dealing with, as this wasn't the only injury Brown dealt with this season. Dealt with the hip, dealt with the obviously dislocated finger as well. And that's not a serious injury, but just injuries getting banged up in general, that wear and tear over time. What do these injuries actually say about the Celtics' future? And do you guys believe that the Jays are they going to have the same athletic advantages in the future as they do? I don't even want to say right now, but as they did this past season, and as we've seen in the past, are the Jays breaking down? What do you guys think about this?
Franco, you want to start off or want me to go?
I could take it, but I'm not saying they're breaking down just yet. I think they're still at a beginning point of their careers where it's not their 30s, and we've seen injuries have more of effects on later on. Once again, this is all wait and see, and like the questions you're asking are all the only answer I can think of is we'll wait and see.
I don't want that answer, Franco.
I know that's not the answer. I know that's not the answer you want.
That's not the answer TV wants.
That's the truth, because we really can't say what we're going to see out of these players when we don't have.
There's a 10-day forecast. People want to know the future.
Yeah, it's if we had their medical reports in front of us and we had Jason Tatum on a medical table and we just watched him try to walk or stand on his foot, or if he's switching over to a boot, or even how well he's moving around on his crutch, then we'd be able to say how much of an approach this is going to have for him. But from what we've seen from Tatum and Brown, they may lose the athletic advantages over time, as to be expected as they get older and age more into their careers, but it's a way that they are able to adapt. You see players that have been able to have this longevity, Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, they have found ways, once the athletic gifts have went away, to add other parts of their game to make up for it, whether it's assisting, having a higher IQ, being able to be in the right places, have better shot outlooks, being more accurate from three. So what I would expect for these guys is obviously their game is going to slow down, and these injuries are definitely not going to be helpful to them. Hopefully we still see Brown and Tatum still have that sense of explosiveness to their game when they do return. And if that's on the table, I would wait until they are able to get back to that level of 100% when you guys talk about the bridge year. Is I don't want these guys coming out as half shells and really just getting their footing when they come back. When they come back, they should be back at 100% firing and not have any levels of concern of re-injury or anything of that sort that they haven't done a full suicide or sprint down the court since the recovery. They've ran 5-on-5 scrimmages throughout practices for multiple weeks. That's the reports I want to hear before Tatum and Brown take the court again, and I want those reports to sound like Tatum and Brown are looking like they're back to normal, or I don't want to hear that it's getting babied in, and then when they come back, you can still see the effects of it. But if whatever we get out of them is less than what we saw, that's to be expected. But it's just being able to continue to adapt their game, and also the Celtics need to be able to adapt with that, having that in mind in season, and being able to rely on these other players that you have on this team to step up and have that leadership role, and also be able to burden some of the weight as these guys get back to full ability.
All right, I'm gonna say this. Seamus, you wanted that yes or no question. I got you. I think this. I think the Boston Celtics, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they will be back. They will be back. You know, we got where's that dang shirt? Oh, I found it. The shirt you guys been waiting for.
Already know which shirt is coming up here. Yep.
Good luck,
Here we go.
Jason. Jason. I'm saying we gotta keep the positivity in the air. Seamus has been very familiar with that shirt. I'm sure a lot of you guys have been too. But positive energy in the air. I'm going to say this. I think definitely, you obviously mentioned it, against OKC, they definitely looked a little slower. They didn't keep up with the younger guys because it's obvious that they're getting a little older too. Obviously, it's not like they're leaving their prime, because they are in their prime, but I think they're going to have more of a Warriors look, and I think they're going to be kind of no, don't laugh. They're gonna have more of a Warrior.
I'm not laughing at your take right now. I'm just laughing at the fact that by technicality we can show this up on screen right now. By technicality. Go ahead, Griffin. Go.
So the train of thought.
It's about keeping professionalism here on Celtics Talk Weekly, man. You gotta look at all these Knicks fans in the comments.
I know.
I mean, like, they're still here. They're
still
here.
No,
you gotta ignore them. You gotta make the big shot, Griffin. When they're all yelling at you in the corner, you gotta make that corner three.
Here it is. So listen.
That was them yelling at you in the corner right there.
So
as I'm sitting here laughing like a little kid on the side.
All right, listen, the Boston Celtics, they're going to look more like a Warriors, all right? They're going to, in 22, they kind of, that's what the Celtics are going to look. It's going to be obvious that they're not going to be the young, healthy, active team they once were, because there's injuries. But I do believe the Jays in particular will recover from these injuries. And I think Brad, being a mastermind that he is, will make a great team and extend this championship window.
Well, I feel like the Celtics are younger than that Warriors team in that comparison. That would mean like when the Celtics when the Warriors beat the Celtics in that NBA Finals, that was the UNC status Warriors. So that was their final great push with Clay and Steph and Draymond, and I think I think we're a few years away from the Celtics being compared to that iteration of the Warriors.
But I want to say this. I'm saying a wear and tear aspect. I feel like they're going to play more at that level and be competitive at that type of level, rather than being young, quick, fast, agile, because you have to look at this OKC team. they're incredible. And you already said it, Seamus. We did not keep up with their level of play in an aspect of
Oh no, we looked slow.
we did.
Slow, and
And
that was a
that's
problem
what
in
I'm
the
saying.
Knicks series too,
But
where the Knicks, I mean, they're typically seen as a slower, grimy team, and the Celtics in the Knicks series, they made the Knicks look fast. They made the Knicks look active. They made the Knicks look physical, which they're naturally a physical team with Tom Thibodeau. But even the Knicks, I mean, the Knicks are not thought of to be
oh,
that boisterously fast, quick, up and down team. Yet that's what they looked like in the series against the Celtics, and that's what to me would have actually caused concerns against a team like the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers are up and down, and they're spry, they're quick, they're fast, and the Celtics this season they simply were not. But I think you're right on that point, Griffin. Of I don't see, and I agree with you, Franco, too, that this is not quite that version yet. Like the Celtics, you could make an argument that this was their first contending window. They just had 4 years of legit aspirations to win the title. 2022, they were up 2-1 at home in game four, up in the fourth quarter of that game before Steph Curry went wild and eventually pulled that game out. 2023, you face an 8 seed in the conference finals. Meanwhile, on the other side, Denver, they face an 8 seed, a 4 seed, and a 7 seed to make the finals. What happens if they do face the number 2 seed Celtics? Do the Celtics actually win that title? 2024, the Celtics actually win the title, and now 2025, the Celtics have a chance, or had the chance rather. I'm still saying, I'm still sometimes talking as if we're still in the season. I got to get used to the fact it's in the
it
past. It's
it
in the
hurts,
past. It
Seamus.
does.
It stings, and it's something that it's gonna take time to get over because it sucks. It really sucks.
No, you're correct. But I'll say this year was a year of contention for the Celtics, and obviously it didn't happen, which is why it hurts so bad. But the last 4 years, I mean, the Warriors had 2015 to 2019 to contend, won the title in 2015, 2016. They go 73-9. They lose the finals. They win back to back titles with a rejuvenated squad with Kevin Durant. I mean, that was an anomaly for that to happen. Steph Curry he was being paid a role player's salary, $11 million. The cap spiked 32% in one summer. They mined out a max slot by trading away Harrison Barnes and Andrew Bogut. They sign Kevin Durant, the Golden State Warriors do, and they win the title in back-to-back years in 17 and 18. And then by 19, that run fizzles out with Kevin Durant, and then they're done with contention. Then they come back in 2022 and win the title again with a completely different squad with some of the same core pieces such as Steph, Draymond, and Clay, of course, and Steve Kerr as the head coach. I could see parallels to the Warriors. Even I think when the Celtics come back, the thing, I agree with you, Franco. I agree with you in this point is when the Celtics come back, they'll be a little bit younger than that Warriors team was in 2022. But I do agree with your point, Griffin, of they're not going to be the most fast, physical, athletic, young looking team. They're going to have to win in a more, I would say, pragmatic way for their skill sets when they come back. But we've seen with teams in the past, veteran led teams, other squads have been able to do that in NBA history. And even in these playoffs, I mean, look at the playoff series that just happened between the Nuggets and the Thunder. The Thunder, everybody thought, oh, the Thunder are going to run away with the series and blow Denver out of the water. Now, don't get me wrong, the Thunder, they had a more talented squad than Denver in this series, which is why they ultimately came out with the series victory. But Denver, just by their play style alone, and obviously having an MVP candidate and Nikola Jokic and one of the best players, let's just face it, of all time. I mean, we don't call Nikola Jokic this enough, but he's one of the best players of all time. Having him on the roster and an identity that they found at the end of the season, particularly on the defensive end of the floor, that was concerning all season long. The Nuggets found that at the end of the year. And then offensively, they always knew, oh, two-man game with Jokic and Murray, they're going to be scoring in this way. And even Jamal Murray's a player that we look at in the league, came into the league the same year as Jaylen Brown. He's had injury issues. He's had injury concerns. He's looked like a shell of his former self at different moments in time, but he's refined his game. He's essentially crafted his game to be a player who is a little bit more methodical, is not necessarily focused on beating guys downhill all the time. That is certainly still within his game, but it's not like if you look at Jamal Murray coming out of Kentucky and some of his first couple of years in the NBA, Jamal Murray is not moving the same way, but he's more skillful in finding his spot, getting to his spots, and hitting down and knocking down his jumpers. That's the second but but Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are kind of the poster children, the example of that in the NBA right now, where it's like, okay, they're not the most fast athletic players. They're not players who in the NBA are going to stand out. From an athletic standpoint, but they still get the job done within their play style because they gear their play style to their advantage based on what their skill set brings. So I do believe Brown and Tatum could do that later on in time. And that's where I think, Griffin, I do agree with your point of it could be a little Warriors esque in that way because that's what the Warriors had to do in 2022. But I do agree with Franco too that the Celtics would be a little bit younger in that situation uh, compared to the Warriors when felt like the Warriors, they were just a little bit older at that point in time. People had really counted their
It felt like
dynasty out.
the
When the
last
Celtics come
stand.
back, people will be they'll believe in the Celtics. If obviously Brown and Tatum, they have to prove it coming back, their injuries, but I think people will believe in the Celtics when they do come back with Brown and Tatum because Tatum will be 28 years old and Brown will be 29 years old. So they're still very much in the meat of their prime with a couple of years left. So there's other than obviously the injuries that we're talking about right now, the age factor doesn't play into it as much as other teams we've seen in the past. So I do agree with your point there, Griffin. I do.
Yeah, I gotta say with that one too, like to just to even look at it too, is like and you said it perfectly right there, Seamus. It's not like the age factor is going to be there. It's just the wear and tear. It's the fact that they're coming back from serious injuries, and it's gonna have to be a different style of game, and that makes us talk about the question we'll have it this off season. Does Joe Mazzulla get that Celtics then? Like what's the Celtics gonna shape out to be? Because it's gonna look a lot different. It's not gonna like, and I hope everyone needs to let this sink in. It's not gonna be the Boston Celtics that we fell in love with winning Banner 18, because it's gonna be a lot different game, and they're gonna have to do it in a different way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Griffin, because coming back, like, let's just say this out loud. Brown and Tatum, we have no idea what they're going to look like coming back to the stage,
What
coming back
when
to or when exactly the timetables for returns. I mean, they're not even available for us yet. And obviously throughout this live stream it's hard to talk about some of the aspects of this injury because we're not medical professionals. We don't even know if Jaylen Brown will have surgery or not yet, but it's very shocking to see it's not shocking to see Jaylen Brown come up with an injury because we knew he was dealing with a knee injury. It's not shocking to hear he had a torn meniscus at the end of the playoffs, but it's very shocking to see how many injuries have now plagued the Celtics this season, and it really highlights some of the great injury luck the Celtics held during their playoff run and how everything needs to break towards a team during a playoff run and how fragile a championship run can actually be for any NBA team out there because the Celtics, we thought in March when they went 14-1 in March, they were well on their way to winning back-to-back titles. But then the injuries at the end of the year, the Jaylen Brown injury was first, but then obviously Tatum tears his Achilles. You have Holiday with his hamstring, Porzingis, his illness, Hauser with his ankle, and then just outside of those guys, you have Horford. He's age 38, not injured, but just somebody you're asking to play a major role in the team. You're asking him. You're asking a lot from Al Horford if you're the Celtics, considering all these injuries, and it's just part of how the entire team fell down. But at the end of this live stream here, again, we talked about tonight Jaylen Brown, torn meniscus per Ramona Shelburne. Jaylen Brown played the end of the season with a torn meniscus. And this comes after Jaylen Brown. It was found out that, yeah, in mid March, around March 12th, when the Celtics played the Oklahoma City Thunder, we thought, Jaylen Brown, he might have some issue here going on. And of course, later on in time, that's now being revealed as a torn meniscus, a partially torn meniscus. And so far, no timetable available on Jaylen Brown's return. He will be reevaluated and just evaluated in general this week to see whether or not he will have surgery on that torn meniscus. And typically, again, all I mentioned this He was on the injury report with a posterior impingement. Jaylen Brown was. Surgery is more common in posterior meniscus tear situations, and even in these situations, again, I mentioned earlier, injections can help that injury, and that's exactly what we saw from Jaylen Brown at the end of the season. And now it's going to be determined whether or not Brown will have surgery or not. However, it's looking like maybe surgery is likely here if it is a posterior injury to his meniscus, but we'll have to. I mean, Franco, I gotta say for TV hates that answer. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. But that is what we're gonna have to do with this injury because up to this point, the amount of information we have on Jaylen Brown's
We're
injury,
guessing. We're throwing
we
out
are very much
hypotheticals
guessing.
to you over here.
We are very much guessing, and what makes this situation even harder too is just we don't know what the team is going to look like next season. We don't know what the Celtics plan is for the future with Brown and Tatum at all. And at this point, it's just if it was a regular situation, if we were going into the offseason with a healthy Tatum, with guys we expected to be back next year as we did last year, right? The offseason last year was very toned down. I mean, the only moves it was oh, we drafted Baylor Shireman and O'Shea Brissett and Svi Mikhaili walked, and we brought in
we
Shireman.
would imagine if we had Lonnie Walker during round 2. I'll just say it
Hey,
again.
Well, the whole season, maybe Tatum wouldn't have had to play so many minutes.
Exactly. This is all because Lonnie Walker wasn't on the team. This is
no, this is rigged because my first podcast was about Lonnie Walker, and I tell you what, I was the biggest Lonnie Walker advocate. And Brad Stevens, you just wouldn't pay that extra money. Listen, I love Brad, but come on, Lonnie Walker, and I said it, would have won us the championship. I'm saying it. Hot take, Lonnie Walker. If you were, and listen, Lonnie Walker got the last laugh too. That guy was in the gym past 12 at night shooting hoops, and you couldn't let. All right, whatever. Next subject. I'm. That's a sore spot for me, as you could tell. You could see.
No, the Lonnie Walker story now turns into a story that for the rest of the time will just be, what if we had Lonnie Walker in the 24-25 season? Because seriously, like it and it's like what if Brown doesn't turn the ball over coming out of the timeout? It wasn't even Brown. I guess it was Brown turning the ball over on that possession where Tatum leaps for it and tears his Achilles. I mean, these are all what ifs. And the Lonnie Walker situation, it's funny how that went from a I don't feel like we ever got our necessary due in talking about that because Lonnie Walker, it's like this is the time of the season where we can actually draw a was this good or not, right? Like and when we were talking about this in December, it's like, well, Lonnie Walker shouldn't be the one holding us back from the 2025 title. But now it's like we can actually make that determination. So I'm just saying.
Yeah, you guys would scoff at me every single time I brought it up on a post-game show.
No,
well, I didn't scoff. I was very much of the crew that was on the like, no, we should have paid for Lonnie Walker. This is the only time we're gonna pay. If we're gonna pay right now, we got to go full mode. We got to go. We got to break out the Brinks truck, as Isaiah Thomas would say.
You guys,
the little guy, IT, break out the Brinks truck.
All right, you guys want to hear a quick Lonnie Walker story? So when I got the breaking news on my phone, I was at Applebee's, and this was my face the whole time. For like 5 minutes straight. I'm not even lying.
He was released?
Yeah, no. When we got him, like when we signed him initially, and my sister's like, "Shut your mouth." She's like, "You're overreacting." And I'm like, we're going back. But to finish my take, we went to Six Flags, and I remember it was against the Raptors, a preseason game, and I had my phone on reel the whole time, and I'm like, "Come on, Lonnie Walker, score!" I was literally, I think that's the most fun I had all season because I wanted him to get a roster spot so bad. And the day that I saw he was cut and no main Celtics either, I was just heartbroken. I forever I will be, because I wanted Lonnie Walker so bad. Like last season when, we got Tillman and who else? Jaden Springer. I was like, oh, we're going to get Lonnie Walker. And we didn't get Lonnie Walker. But then we got Lonnie Walker and then we send him to the Wolves, But yeah,
I got a story too. I texted Rob immediately because Rob was so adamant about the Celtics getting Lonnie Walker last season before the championship run, before the 2024 championship run. And then afterwards we get Lonnie Walker, and I was like, whoa, I'll be damned. It's like Rob called this all the way through, and it's like, hey, we got him after the championship run. It's like, what can we do with him now? But as we can see, I mean, Lonnie Walker, it's hard to say whether or not it was him that made or broke the Celtics in the end, but obviously the injuries had something to do with it as well. But as for this live stream, another somber. I don't know. I had a good time with this live stream, but obviously the
Can
topics
you
in which
play
we're
the
talking
rock
about.
music?
Yeah, let's cue the rock music. Obviously, on this live stream, the topics we were talking about very somber, but we all had a good time here, and that's gonna do it for us here on the CTW show. I am your host, Seamus Zarlingo. Alongside of me tonight, Nick Franco and Griffin Aldrich. And as I always say, thank you all for watching, and go Celtics.